everything you've ever called love was a lie. Not because she deceived you, but because you've never loved her. Only the ghost you built in her image. Let me tell you a secret about love. A small, venomous, and exquisitely painful secret. The kind you only confess to a stranger in a dying port town as a storm gathers out at sea. It's this. You have never, not once, loved another person. You have only ever loved the beautiful, tragic, and utterly obedient phantom you built in their image. You meet them on a humid summer evening, perhaps, when the air is thick with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and unspoken desperation. There is a spark. You call it chemistry, fate, a cosmic click. How romantic, how convenient. But what is that spark, really? It is not the meeting of two souls. It is the violent, ecstatic collision of your own unmet needs with a warm body that happens to be standing in the right place. She smiles, and in that smile, you don't see her. You see the echo of a forgotten kindness from your childhood. She has a certain way of tilting her head when she's listening, and you are not charmed by the gesture itself. You are mesmerized because it is the physical manifestation of the attention you've been starving for. She loves a particular sad song, and you think, my God, she understands me. She doesn't. She simply likes the melody. You are the one who has draped your entire inner world over those few simple notes, turning a pop song into a symphony of your own exquisite suffering. You are a desperate architect, a brilliant, feverish sculptor, and she is your finest marble. You chip away at her reality, discarding the inconvenient truths, the jarring opinions, the parts of her that don't fit the blueprint of your salvation. You carve and sand and polish until the woman standing before you is no longer a person, but a perfect, gleaming monument to your own ego. A mirror that reflects back not who you are, but who you desperately need to be for. The old Germans had a word for everything, of course. They would likely call it Sehnsuchtsbild, the longing image, an ideal projection born from deficiency. Schopenhauer, that cheerful old bastard, would say it's just the will to life tricking you, putting on a pretty mask to dupe you into procreating and perpetuating the cosmic joke. He'd say, you're not a lover. You're a biological tool, enchanted by a clever marketing campaign for the species. There's an old piece of forgotten Scandinavian folklore, a whisper from the fjords. They speak of the Glimmerkvinne, the shimmer wife. She is a creature born of moonlight on water and the frost on a dying man's window. She is never the same woman twice. To a lonely farmer, she appears with hands calloused from the harvest and a scent of rich earth. To a disgraced prince, she appears with a crown of starlight and eyes that know the burden of a kingdom. She is in every way his perfect counterpart. She mirrors his deepest unspoken need. And after he has given his entire soul to her, she dissolves with the morning sun, leaving him not just alone, but hollowed out by the shape of his own perfect creation. He wasn't destroyed by a monster. He was destroyed by a prayer that was answered. And this is the modern condition, isn't it? We swipe through profiles, which are nothing but curated collections of our most flattering lies. A 2024 study out of a clinic in Berlin, one of those terribly serious places that studies affective disorders, found something chilling. Using neuroimaging, they discovered that the pleasure centers in a man's brain light up far more intensely when he is imagining a future with a new partner, projecting his hopes, dreams, and fantasies onto her blank slate, than when he is confronted with her actual, complicated, and often disappointing reality later on. The fantasy is literally more rewarding than the person. We are all in love with a Glimmerkvinne. We date the phantom, we marry the phantom, We whisper our deepest secrets into the ear of a ghost we ourselves have summoned. And then, one day, the real person breaks through. She has a thought you didn't give her. She develops a dream that doesn't include you. She reveals a flaw so raw and human, it cracks the marble statue you've so lovingly built. And you feel betrayed. You've changed, you'll say. It is the ultimate accusation. But the translation is, you have failed to remain the perfect, inanimate object of my fantasy. The true horror, the one that keeps men like me awake at 3 a.m. with the bottle as my only confidant, is this. The most profound intimacy you have ever experienced was not with her. It was with yourself, through her. It was a monologue you mistook for a dialogue. A beautiful, elaborate, and soul-crushing act of ventriloquism. So I ask you, look across the dinner table. Look at the woman lying next to you in the dark. Her breath, a quiet rhythm you've come to depend on. When you tell her you love her, who are you really talking to? And what will you do when the ghost you've built finally learns to scream back in a voice that is not your own? Every word you use to describe your love becomes another nail in its coffin. A little poem for the occasion. The wild thing, it had no name. A frantic beat. A silent flame. You called it love to make it tame, and watched it die within the frame. We are creatures of language, a clumsy, brutal, and arrogant species that believes if we can name a thing, we can own it. We stick labels on the infinite chaos of the cosmos and call it science. We slap diagnoses on the howling wilderness of the human soul and call it psychology. And we commit the most egregious act of all. We take the most terrifying, electric, and untamable force in our lives, and we give it a name. We call it love. And in that single, seemingly innocent act of definition, we begin the slow, meticulous process of killing it. Think of the beginning, before the words. It was a current, wasn't it? A silent, intuitive pull. A shared glance across a room that said more than 1,000 sonnets. It was a feeling in your gut, a warmth in your chest. A formless, beautiful, and slightly dangerous presence between you. It was wild. It was alive. It was free precisely because it was undefined. It was a creature of the deep forest, glimpsed only at twilight. Then you opened your mouth. You said it. The 3 little words. I love you. It feels like a summit, a revelation. But it is, in fact, the first nail. You have taken the boundless, living wilderness and tried to cram it into a tiny, 3-word cage. You have captured the wild thing, and now you must keep it. From there, the vocabulary of embalming begins. You become poets of preservation. You add more words, more labels, thinking you are strengthening the bond. You are my soulmate, my one and only, my forever. Each term is another pin, fastening the vibrant, fluttering wings of the feeling to a corkboard. It looks beautiful. It is perfectly preserved. And it is utterly, irrevocably dead. This is the great paradox Kierkegaard saw with such agonizing clarity. He understood that to name a subjective, passionate, infinite experience is to drag it into the world of the universal, the finite, the ethical. The moment your unique, terrifying, beautiful feeling for her becomes love, it is now subject to the rules of love. It must now perform as love is expected to perform. It becomes a duty, an institution. It's no longer a wild god, it's a civil servant. There are whispers in old forgotten mythologies, stories of the nameless folk, beings of immense power, of wind and shadow and water, who roamed the earth free and sovereign. But they had a vulnerability. If a mortal ever discovered their true name and spoke it aloud, the being would become their slave, bound to do their bidding, its power curdling into a resentful, diminished form of itself. We do this to each other every day. We learn the secret name of that wild feeling in another's heart, and we speak it. And in doing so, we enslave it. We demand it behave. We civilize it to death. The relationship becomes a work of taxidermy. You are no longer experiencing a living thing, you are admiring your handiwork. You arrange it just so. You polish the glass eyes. You say, "Look how beautiful our love is. It hasn't changed a bit." You are right, it hasn't. A corpse rarely does. Modern psychology, in its own sterile way, has stumbled upon this truth. A 2023 study on affect labeling showed that the act of putting a powerful, complex emotion into simple words can significantly reduce its physiological and neurological intensity. The researchers celebrated this as a tool for managing anxiety. They missed the terrifying implication: our language is a sedative. We speak to numb. We define to control. We are so terrified of the sheer chaotic power of true connection that we instinctively reach for the nearest label to tranquilize it. You build a fortress of words, anniversaries, pet names, vows, future plans, shared histories recited like catechisms. You think you are building a home. You are building a mausoleum, a beautiful, ornate, and utterly airless tomb where the wild thing you once captured lies in state. And you sit inside it, holding hands, wondering why you feel so cold. You wonder why the silence between you is no longer filled with electric potential, but with the hollow echo of words long since spoken and stripped of their meaning. So here is my riddle for you, my friend. You stand before a closed door. Behind it is the wild, nameless, terrifying feeling you first had. Alive, unpredictable, and possibly dangerous. In your hand, you hold the key. The word love. If you keep the door shut, you may have to live in the wilderness, never certain, always on edge, but truly alive. If you use the key, you will have a safe, predictable, and respectable relationship. A love you can show your friends. A perfect, beautiful corpse. Which do you choose? Or have you already chosen? So long ago you've forgotten the sound of the lock clicking shut. Love is not a feeling. It is a role you were handed at birth and have been rehearsing ever since. Imagine your life as a theater, not a grand one with gilded balconies and adoring crowds, but a dusty, forgotten playhouse on the edge of town. The velvet on the seats is worn thin, smelling of damp and regret. The air is thick with the ghosts of 1,000 failed productions. And you, my friend, are the lead actor. You have been on this stage your entire life. You were given your first costume as a boy. They teach you the lines for the good son. Then, as you get older, you are handed a new wardrobe. You try on the ill-fitting costume of the ambitious young man. Then the slightly more comfortable, more dangerous one of the passionate suitor. And then, for the grand production, the one that will run for decades, you are given the heaviest costume of all, the good husband, the reliable partner, the stable provider. You didn't write these lines. The script was written for you by a committee of ghosts. Your parents, your culture, the movies you watched, the books you were told to admire. It's a very solid script, a very respectable script. It has a beginning, a middle, and a predictable, quietly tragic end. And your co-star? She has her own script, her own set of costumes. You meet on stage under the dusty, buzzing lights, and you begin to perform for one another. Your courtship is the first act. You both play your parts beautifully. You hit your marks. You recite the lines about dreams and futures with practiced sincerity. The first "I love you" is not a confession. It is a line from the script, delivered at the perfect dramatic moment. The engagement is a set change. The wedding is the grand finale of Act 1, performed for an audience of other actors who applaud because you are validating their own performances. There is an old, cruel fable, whispered to have come from a village lost in a perpetual fog. In this village, every child is given a porcelain mask at birth. A smiling mask for a girl, a stoic and noble mask for a boy. They are taught never to remove it. They grow, they work, they marry other masks. They praise the beautiful, unchanging expressions of their partners. They have children and craft for them new, tiny masks. The village is peaceful. It is orderly. The greatest taboo is not to touch another's mask, but to acknowledge that you are wearing one at all. The true horror of this village is not the deception. It is that after a generation or two, the villagers' own facial muscles have atrophied, and their real faces have slowly, painfully molded to the shape of the mask. There is nothing underneath anymore. This is the life of the good man. You have played the role so well, for so long, that you have forgotten there is a person underneath the costume. You perform acts of service not from a spontaneous wellspring of affection, but because that is what the good husband does in Scene 4. You offer comfort not from empathy, but because your script says, "Enter, stage left, and offer a hug." You have become an automaton of virtue. As Kierkegaard would have it, you have become a tragic hero, a man who sacrifices his own singular, authentic self for the sake of a universal, ethical ideal. You are admired by all, and you are a ghost to yourself. A recent, deeply cynical study from the London School of Economics, published in some obscure 2025 journal, of course, tracked what they called normative relationship trajectories. They found that couples who deviated from the standard social script, dating, engagement, marriage, home ownership, children, in that precise order, showed exponentially higher rates of anxiety and faced greater social alienation. The conclusion was clinical and brutal. Society does not reward authenticity. It punishes improvisation. The audience wants to see the play they paid for. So you perform. You perform on holidays. You perform at dinner parties. You perform in the bedroom. And perhaps the most terrifying performance of all is when you are alone together, in the quiet of the evening, and you are both still wearing your costumes. The silence thick with the unspoken terror that if you were to take them off, you wouldn't recognize the stranger standing before you. Or worse, you wouldn't recognize yourself. The intimacy is not between two people. It is the friction between two masks. But here, in the dust and the gloom of this forgotten theater, lies a secret, fragile kind of hope. It is the moment of lucidity, the moment when, mid-line, you realize the absurdity of it all. You see the stage lights, you feel the weight of the costume, you hear the faint, hollow echo of your own voice, and you understand. It is all a performance. This realization is not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. It is the moment you realize you can simply stop. You can stand there, mid-scene, and refuse to say the next line. You can turn your back on your co-star, on the ghostly audience, and simply walk off the stage into the unlit, unknown darkness of the wings. It is the most terrifying and the only truly free act available to you. So go on. I dare you. The next time you are on stage, performing the scene of the quiet domestic evening, she is there, playing her part. The stage is set. You have your script. Your next line is probably something like, "How was your day, dear?" But what if, just this once, you forgot it on purpose? What happens when an actor on a live stage, in front of everyone, goes silent? The most forbidden prayer in a man's heart is not for another woman, but for absolute deafening silence. I am going to tell you the most dangerous secret a man can keep. It is a secret more treacherous than infidelity, more corrosive than resentment, because it is a betrayal not just of a person, but of the entire religion of us. It is a confession that, if spoken aloud, could shatter the very foundations of the life you have so carefully built. Here it is. The deepest, most desperate yearning in your heart is not for more connection, but for less. It is the sacred, terrifying, and utterly consuming hunger for solitude. I don't mean me time. I don't mean an hour in the garage with your tools or a weekend fishing trip with your friends. That is just a brief furlough, a sanctioned leave of absence from your post. I am talking about a desire for a radical, monastic, and permanent aloneness. A silence so profound it deafens. An emptiness so vast it becomes a presence. It is the treasonous thought that flickers through your mind in the middle of a perfectly pleasant dinner party, surrounded by the cheerful noise of friends and the warm presence of your partner. While you are smiling and nodding, a part of your soul is screaming, clawing at the walls, desperate to flee to a silent room, lock the door, and not emerge for 1,000 years. It is the feeling you get when she is talking about her day, about the future, about a problem you are expected to solve. And while you make all the right sympathetic noises, your consciousness has already retreated to a quiet, desolate landscape inside you. A windswept coast, a barren desert, a single chair in an empty room. This is your true home. Everything else has become a foreign country where you are forced to speak a language that is not your own. Schopenhauer, that master of misery, knew this well. He said that a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free. Society, even the society of two, demands a price. The price is a small, constant chipping away at your authentic self to make it fit into the shared space. After years, you look down and see that almost nothing is left. There are legends of a lost monastic order from the high deserts, sometimes called the Silent Fathers. They were not boys who had never known the world. They were men who had lived it completely. They had been husbands, fathers, merchants, soldiers. And then, at a certain age, when they felt the performance of life had worn their souls down to a transparent film, they would conduct their own funeral. They would say goodbye to their families, give away their possessions, and walk into the desert to a monastery of bare stone cells. Their goal was not to find God. It was to spend the next 30 years in absolute silence, to finally allow the man who had been buried under a lifetime of roles to claw his way to the surface. Their only sin was to miss the noise. We pathologize this desire now. We call it depression, avoidance, intimacy disorders. We are told that a desire for solitude is a symptom of a sickness that must be cured. What if the sickness is the relentless, suffocating demand for constant connection? A recent neuroendocrinology study, one of those quiet ones from Stanford that no one talks about, examined something they called relational cortisol fatigue. They found that many men in long-term, stable domestic partnerships maintain a chronically elevated level of the stress hormone, cortisol. It's a low-grade, constant stress. The stress of performance, the stress of vigilance, the stress of emotional interpretation. And when did these cortisol levels return to a healthy natural baseline? Not on vacation, not during a date night, only during extended periods of genuine, unobserved, and undemanded upon solitude. The body itself was crying out for the empty room. Your treasonous prayer is a biological necessity. This empty room is a sacred place. When you first enter it, the silence is terrifying. It is filled with the ghosts of all the things you have done and failed to do. But if you can bear it, if you can sit in that silence long enough, something extraordinary happens. The ghosts get tired of whispering. The noise of the outside world fades, and you begin to hear a voice you have not heard since you were a boy, your own. This is the fragile, dangerous hope. In that gospel of emptiness, you begin to meet yourself. Not the husband, not the father, not the employee, not the performer, just the raw, unaccustomed self. It is a frightening and not always pleasant introduction, but it is real. The strength you find in this room is not to be a better partner. It is the strength to no longer need to be one to feel whole. The final paradox is that the more time you spend in the sacred emptiness, the less you desire to leave it. You have tasted a freedom so pure that the love waiting for you outside begins to feel like a beautiful, beloved prison. So listen. Can you hear it? Underneath the sound of the television, the traffic, her breathing next to you in bed, there is a door. The door to that empty room. It's always been there. It is waiting for you. My question is this, whispered from one trader to another. What are you so afraid you will find if you finally turn the handle and step inside? True love isn't bridging the gap between two souls. It's learning to worship the abyss that separates them. There is a myth that is never told about two beings who existed at the dawn of time. They were not lovers, but counterparts. And they lived on the peaks of two impossibly tall mountains, separated by a chasm so deep it was said to have no bottom. For eons, they labored under a divine madness to reach one another. They tried to build a bridge of woven starlight, but it crumbled into cosmic dust. They tried to shout secrets across the void, but their words were swallowed by the infinite silence. They tried to carve a path down into the darkness and up the other side, but they only grew more lost and more alone. Their existence was a monument to frantic, hopeful, and an agonizing failure. Then, one day, they stopped. In a moment of shared silent enlightenment, they both laid down their celestial tools. They dismantled the foundations of their failed bridges. They walked to the cliff edge of their respective mountains, sat down, and simply looked. For the first time, they were not looking at the goal of the other side. They were looking at the magnificent, terrifying, and uncrossable abyss between them. And in that shared gaze, in that mutual acceptance of the eternal distance, they found a peace that a billion years of striving had never given them. They had discovered the only intimacy that was real, the sacrament of the shared abyss. This, my friend, is the final and most liberating truth. This is the strange salvation that comes when a man stops chasing the phantom that destroys him. All your life, you have been that frantic God. The phantom you built in her image was a blueprint for a bridge. The cage of words, the vows, and the promises were the materials. The performance of the good husband was the labor, and you have watched, time and time again, as it all collapsed into the chasm. You have called this collapse heartbreak, failure, the end of love. You have wept at the ruins. You have been weeping in the wrong church. The liberation is not in finally building a bridge that holds. The liberation is in the beauty of the collapse. It is the moment you look at the rubble of your expectations, the dust of your romantic ideals, and you begin to laugh. A quiet, weary, but profoundly free laugh. It is the final, shattering punchline to the joke of fusion. The old German with the magnificent mustache, Nietzsche, called it amor fati, the love of one's fate. Not just to bear what is necessary, but to love it. Your fate, our fate, is this abyss, this fundamental, non-negotiable separateness. We are each a sovereign island universe of consciousness. A recent, chilling hypothesis in theoretical psychology calls it the principle of ontological solitude. The idea that a single consciousness is, by its very nature, a closed system, incapable of direct merger, only of sending and receiving flawed, imperfect signals. To love your fate is to stop seeing this separateness as a tragedy, and to start seeing it as the very condition of your magnificence. You are not half of a whole. You are a complete, terrifying, and unknowable cosmos. And so is she. The chase is over. The desperate need to be seen, to be understood, to have your inner world perfectly mirrored by another, dies. And what rises from its ashes is something far more potent than love. It is respect. A profound, almost fearful respect for the absolute otherness of the person before you. You can finally look at her, not as a source of validation or a solution to your loneliness, but as another God sitting on an opposing mountain peak. You cannot know her. You cannot save her. You cannot merge with her. You can only bear witness to her existence, and she to yours. This is the new sacrament. It is an intimacy born not of closeness, but of distance. Two separate beings, fully aware of the unbridgeable void between them, choosing to stand at the edge together, without illusion, without demand. It is the shared acknowledgement of a beautiful, incurable solitude. There is no more performance. There is only presence. There is no more desperate striving. There is only the quiet awe of the abyss. You are free. Free from the exhausting burden of trying to be one. Free from the bitterness that comes when she fails to be the ghost you invented. Free to finally, truly be alone, even in her presence. And in this freedom, you might, for the very first time, be able to engage with her honestly. Not as a lover, but as one mystery greeting another. So the final question is not about love, or her, or what you should do. It is about the landscape of your own existence. All this time, you have been staring at the other mountain, obsessed with crossing the gap. But have you ever turned around, just once, to look at the vast, uncharted, and magnificent kingdom that is your own peak?